Hi, I'm Sarah Lacy. I'm backstage with Chris Farmer, who just had a pretty interesting panel on stage. Now, it's interesting because we've had all these subjective panels so far at Disrupt about New York venture capital and what's happening with this, and you came out with some new methodology that shows, where the top new venture firms are, and I think it's interesting because venture capital is one of those weird things where brands are these powerful things, and once you're in that top, the funds are 10-year cycles. It takes a long time for someone to rise or fall. So you've come up with a new way of looking at momentum, basically.
Yep.
So describe just a little bit for people who weren't watching.
So we looked at syndication patterns of, essentially peer review. It came up with a Google PageRank type algorithm that if a fund leads an investment in company A and then another top fund follows them, that's in essence a peer review. If that happens consistently across the portfolio.
So it's basically, everyone jokes about venture capitalists being lemmings. It's who the lemmings are following.
To a degree, there's definitely the potential for groupthink, but that actually flows all the way through to M&A and the IPO. Right?
No, the person who's leading the lemmings wins. That's not a diss.
Right. No, but it's
they're
true.
the first one, and then everyone else is.
But ultimately, over time, it's based on traction. But yes, there's definitely in the beginning, in the early phases of a company that's anointed leadership often will gain additional traction at a faster pace because of that, the hype around the opportunity or the company.
Right. So, what's interesting about this is we've seen so many of what used to be the classic early stage firms, chasing and getting in these secondary deals and very late stage deals. And implicit in your methodology is just saying that's not real leadership in the space.
Yeah, so exactly. So if other top firms are also coming in concurrently, then it still counts to their benefit. But if they're the last one into a deal or late into a deal, they don't get as much credit for it in their ranking as they would if they were early, because the returns aren't going to be as strong.
Right. And we did a piece that sort of looked at this in a chart, looking at like the sort of what we would argue call the top 5 firms, which doesn't match your methodology. What entrepreneurs and the general wisdom in the valley is top 5 firms, and then the top 5 to 7. Kind of consumer deals and sort of who came in where. And, I think both are interesting ways of like busting this marketing bubble of someone saying, well, we're in Facebook and Twitter, and it's like, well, you just bought their secondary shares for $50 billion.
Right.
That's not the same claim.
Right.
One of the firms that people say does this the most is Andreessen Horowitz, who came up as number 1 for you, right?
So this methodology actually, a few of those deals are in there, but several of them are not. It just, because they were the last money in or it was a late stage round, this more focuses on the early stages of their portfolio. So not only are they doing the high profile deals, but they also have a high number of deals in the throes with the absolute best funds at the earliest stages. They're one of the most active seed investors as well. It's a remarkable breadth of the strategy that they do.
That's what I was going to ask you. Their strategy is very much, we will add a ton of value later on in seed stage. We're not necessarily going to spend a lot of time with the company. We're going to throw stuff out there. So they have a different strategy than a lot of the other firms. Is that sort of artificially making them rank higher?
Well, so the seed stage investments are actually not in this because many of the top funds don't disclose what their seed stage investments are. So this is Series A on. But the data set for Andreessen is relatively small. It's only 22 companies versus I think it's something like 70 for Sequoia. So it's early days of understanding how that strategy will play out. But the A and B round deals that they've been in have typically been very competitive deals alongside the best investors in the industry.
Now, one thing I think was really interesting about this, we know who the firms are that are behind, again, those top 5 companies that are going to be some of the biggest internet companies we've ever seen. But part of what you're doing is getting beneath those and looking at the companies beneath the fold. So you mentioned with your firm, General Catalyst, Kayak and Bright Cove, and some of these companies that may be a little old in the tooth that we may have we don't write about every day on TechCrunch. Not going to be a $50 billion company, but still going to be a $1 billion winner. Like, that's a lot of the names that are skewing this, right?
Right.
Or not skewing this, but forcing them.
Well, in the case of General Catalyst, they tend to be the first investor, and they haven't played the later rounds into some of the higher profile deals at higher prices, but they've still managed to have many of the top firms follow them in those deals. And a number of those deals are either filing to go public or in process of getting to scale. So as one of the newer firms, companies like Facebook actually aren't in this data because Facebook was a 2004 investment, and some of these companies go way back.
Right.
Right. And so the initial round had to be 2006 or later.
Uh-huh.
And so this is a more recent data set. Once you get 5+ years out, you can look at the exact companies and you have a really strong sense of traction. And therefore you might as well look at reality instead of some type of predictive algorithm.
Right. How much can one really great deal sway this?
So
You mentioned NEA,
dramatically.
which has not been a firm that's been on top in the consumer world.
Yep.
Did Groupon early on. Is Groupon the one swaying them?
They've had a number of high-profile deals recently on the consumer side. Playdom, Groupon. I'm trying to think of some of the others.
Well, but, I mean, point being, it's not, just the massive ones. So
Right. Yeah. No. But this is, ultimately,
Yeah.
it is typically very. If you talk to limited partners,
Right.
to have the massive
Yeah.
returns in the funds, you tend to have ultimately one of those
Well, I mean, that's-
big hits, or you have to have a very large stake in a company that has a large outcome.
Right.
So, so the earlier you are, sometimes in the case of General Catalyst, for example, the company will own 30 or 40% of the company that may become a $1 billion outcome. It's a much larger win than somebody who pays up at a later
Right.
stage, and it may be a larger outcome,
Yeah.
but their stake is much smaller.
Yeah, I
right?
mean, there's a lot of interesting variables to look at, particularly because you have these companies that are so outsized, and it's like if you have an early stake in them, it's it all boils down to this sort of central stat that I think explains almost every weirdness in the venture capital industry, that people who typically don't cover it, why
Right.
they make false assumptions, and it's this stat that 95% of the returns come from 5% of the companies.
Right.
And so you have to look at these kind of things to.
You do, and ultimately that's why the final rankings
Yeah.
will not be the same as what I put up there.
Right.
I actually think Union Square Ventures will be
Right.
the #1 returning fund
Right.
because it's small and they have a number of the monster wins that they got
Right.
in very early.
Yeah.
Right. But this on a probability of catching one of those
Yeah.
wins. I mean, even talk to like Peter Thiel.
Right.
Right. He'll say that they made several
Yeah.
social networking investments, and they didn't know which one was going to be Facebook, but because they
Right.
made several
But one
smart
was,
social
thank
networks,
God.
one of them became it.
Okay.
So it's hard to predict up front, but the more you have kind of the top potential investments in it, the higher the probability
That's
you
the
actually
fun
have
of the
one.
business.
Right.
So we've got to wrap up in just a second. I want to. You're involved with Get Around,
Yes.
right? Which is, I mean, I've been saying now for 2 days is one of the 2 standout companies, and I
Yep.
think Bill Guard and Get Around, 2 of the best companies we've ever seen at a TechCrunch
Great.
conference.
We agree.
Any thoughts on them? Any good luck? Or you think they're going to win? Are you
I
excited?
do. I mean, I think Get Around is one of the most disruptive ideas. If you think about the fact that vehicles are probably the 3rd largest component of the consumer kind of spend, and that they sit idle 90+% of the time, there's an incredible opportunity to bring efficiency
Yeah.
and lower the effective cost of having a vehicle. And it also reduces congestion, so there's a lot of constituents that want this to happen. And
Right.
Zipcar's really paved the way, but because of the capital requirements of owning all the vehicles and managing a fleet,
Right.
there's a limitation of how quickly they can grow. And I think Get Around, because they're using third-party vehicles and they've managed to figure out how to have
Well, I mean, it's airline seats, it's hotel, it's the same sort of reusing perishable efficiency play that has been throughout the web.
Right, absolutely, but it's also a massive spend for the consumer and much more inefficient than even airlines or a lot of those because,
Right.
again, 90% non-utilization.
Right, right.
So-
Well, Chris, thank you so much for meeting with us. I hope you're
Great.
going to keep doing this study because it'll be fascinating to see how it
Yeah,
changes.
I'd love to do it for the micro
I'm-
VCs as well.
And I'm
work
the
with you
biggest
guys on that.
VC data nerd at TechCrunch, so keep me on speed dial.
Great.
Chris Farmer from Disrupt, thank you again.
All right, great.